Welcome to our channel, where we delve into the deepest, darkest corners of your imagination. Tonight, we bring you 20 spine-chilling tales that will make you question every creak, every shadow, and every gust of wind that whispers through your home when you are alone. These are disturbing home alone horror stories. Get comfortable, but not too comfortable. And remember, it's just a story. Or is it? Story 1. It was the first night Lucy was spending alone in her new apartment. Excited to have her own space, she set up her bedroom and went to bed. Around midnight, she heard a soft lullaby playing from the living room. She got up to investigate, but found nothing. The next night, the lullaby played again, this time louder. As she followed the sound, she saw an old music box on the coffee table, which she had never seen before. She opened it, and the lullaby stopped. But the next morning, the music box was gone. The mysterious lullaby continued every night, driving Lucy to the brink of insanity. She could never find the source, and no one else could hear it. The haunting melody became a part of her life, a constant reminder that she was never truly alone. Lucy had always dreamed of living alone. The freedom, the independence, and the joy of having her own space were all things she had longed for. When she finally found a quaint little apartment in the heart of the city, she knew it was the perfect place to start this new chapter of her life. The apartment was located in an old building, full of character and charm. Its high ceilings, large windows, and vintage fixtures gave it a timeless feel. Lucy spent the first day moving in, unpacking her belongings, and arranging her furniture. By the time night fell, she was exhausted but content. As she prepared for bed, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The apartment already felt like home. She crawled under the covers, turned off the lights, and closed her eyes, ready for a good night's sleep. Around midnight, Lucy was awakened by a soft, melodic sound. At first, she thought it was part of a dream, but as she became more awake, she realized the sound was real. It was a lullaby, playing softly from the living room. Confused and slightly unnerved, Lucy got out of bed and tiptoed to the living room. The melody was beautiful, but it had an eerie quality to it. She looked around the room, trying to find the source, but there was nothing there that could be playing music. She checked her phone and other electronic devices, but they were all off. The music seemed to be coming from nowhere. After a thorough search, she decided it must have been her imagination. She returned to bed, but sleep did not come easily. The next day, Lucy went about her routine, putting the previous night's events out of her mind. She told herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. After all, moving into a new place could be disorienting. However, that night, the lullaby returned. This time, it was louder and more distinct. Lucy got up again, determined to find the source. She walked through the dark apartment, her heart pounding. The music seemed to follow her, always just out of reach. As she entered the living room, she saw something on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. It was an old music box, intricately designed and covered in dust. She had never seen it before and had no idea how it had gotten there. Hesitantly, she opened the music box. The lullaby stopped immediately. She examined the box, but there were no markings or clues as to where it had come from. She decided to leave it on the coffee table and went back to bed, feeling more uneasy than ever. The next morning, the music box was gone. Lucy searched the entire apartment, but it had vanished without a trace. She couldn't understand what was happening. Was someone playing a prank on her? Or was there something more sinister at work? She decided to ask her neighbors if they had noticed anything unusual. Most of them were friendly, but had no idea what she was talking about. One elderly woman, Mrs. Jenkins, mentioned that the apartment had been vacant for a long time and that the previous tenants had left suddenly. Mrs. Jenkins also mentioned that she had heard strange noises coming from the apartment in the past. Lucy's unease grew. She began to wonder if the apartment was haunted. But she was determined not to let fear drive her away from her new home. The lullaby continued every night, and Lucy's sleep became increasingly disturbed. She started to dread bedtime, knowing that the music would return. She tried sleeping with earplugs, but the lullaby seemed to penetrate them, becoming even more haunting and insistent. She began to experience other strange occurrences. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open and shut, and she often felt a cold, unexplainable draft. Her friends noticed her growing exhaustion and anxiety, but she didn't want to tell them the full extent of what was happening. She feared they would think she was losing her mind. Lucy decided to keep a journal of the events, hoping it would help her make sense of what was happening. She meticulously documented each night's lullaby, any strange noises, and any other odd occurrences. But the more she wrote, the more real the haunting seemed to become. Desperate for answers, Lucy decided to seek help. She contacted a local paranormal investigator, a woman named Rachel, who had a reputation for solving mysterious cases. Rachel agreed to come to the apartment and see if she could identify the source of the disturbances. When Rachel arrived, she brought with her an array of equipment, including EMF meters, audio recorders, and thermal cameras. She conducted a thorough investigation of the apartment, spending hours trying to capture evidence of the haunting. That night, Rachel stayed with Lucy to observe the lullaby firsthand. As expected, the music started around midnight. Rachel immediately began recording and taking readings. She noted a significant spike in electromagnetic activity and a drop in temperature whenever the lullaby played. After several nights of investigation, Rachel made a startling discovery. She found an old newspaper article about a young girl who had lived in the apartment over 100 years ago. The girl, named Emily, had died tragically in a fire that had destroyed part of the building. Rachel believed that Emily's spirit was still present in the apartment, and that the music box was somehow connected to her. The lullaby, Rachel theorized, was a way for Emily to reach out, perhaps seeking help or comfort. Rachel suggested conducting a seance to try to communicate with Emily's spirit and find out what she wanted. Lucy was hesitant but agreed, hoping it might bring an end to the haunting. Rachel prepared for the seance, setting up candles and arranging a circle of protection. She and Lucy sat around a small table, holding hands. Rachel began to call out to Emily, asking her to show herself and explain why she was haunting the apartment. For a long time, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the flickering of the candles. Then, the temperature dropped sharply, and the lullaby began to play. The music was louder and more intense than ever before. Rachel continued to call out, and suddenly, the candles blew out. The room was plunged into darkness. Lucy felt a cold hand on her shoulder and heard a soft, childlike voice whispering in her ear. She couldn't make out the words, but the presence felt both sad and pleading. Rachel managed to light a candle, and they saw a faint, ghostly figure of a young girl standing in the corner of the room. The girl looked at Lucy with sad eyes, then pointed to a spot on the floor. Lucy and Rachel moved to the spot and began to pull up the floorboards. Underneath, they found a small, hidden compartment. Inside was the music box, along with a locket and a letter. The letter was from Emily's mother, explaining that the music box had been a gift to Emily and that it played her favorite lullaby. The locket contained a picture of Emily and her mother. The letter expressed a deep love and a sorrow that they had been separated by tragedy. Lucy and Rachel decided to hold a memorial for Emily, hoping it would help her spirit find peace. They invited a few close friends and held a small, heartfelt ceremony in the apartment. They placed the music box, locket, and letter in a special box and buried it in a nearby park. As they finished the ceremony, Lucy felt a sense of calm wash over her. That night, for the first time since she had moved in, the lullaby did not play. The apartment felt different, lighter, and more welcoming. Lucy continued to live in the apartment, and the strange occurrences stopped. She often thought of Emily and felt a connection to the young girl whose spirit had once haunted her home. She kept the journal as a reminder of the experience and as a way to honor Emily's memory. Lucy found peace, and Emily's spirit finally rested, but not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 2. Tonight, we continue with our series of unsettling tales. Our next story takes us into the depths of an old house with a hidden secret. This is The Old Man in the Attic. David had always wanted a house with character, a place with history. When he found the old Victorian home on the edge of town, it seemed like a dream come true. The house was beautiful, with its ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, and sprawling garden. Despite its age, it had a charm that newer homes lacked. David moved in with excitement, ready to make the house his own. He spent the first few days exploring every nook and cranny, admiring the craftsmanship and wondering about the lives of those who had lived there before him. The attic, however, remained a mystery. The door was locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. On his first night in the house, David settled into his new bedroom. The night was quiet, and the house seemed to welcome him. He fell asleep easily, but in the middle of the night, he was awakened by a strange sound. It was a soft, shuffling noise, like someone moving slowly across the floor above him. David sat up, his heart pounding. The sound seemed to be coming from the attic. He listened intently, but the noise stopped as suddenly as it had begun. He told himself it was probably just the house settling, an old building making typical noises. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. Over the next few nights, the noises continued. Each night, around the same time, David would hear the shuffling sound, followed by faint, indistinct murmuring. He decided it was time to investigate the attic, locked door or not. He searched the house for a key but found nothing. Frustrated but determined, he borrowed a lock-picking set from a friend and managed to open the door. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in cobwebs. As David moved deeper into the space, he noticed a strange, almost palpable chill in the air. In one corner of the attic, he found an old rocking chair. It was swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze. As he approached the chair, he saw a figure sitting in it, an old man, hunched over, mumbling to himself. David froze in terror, unable to move or speak. The old man looked up, his eyes filled with sorrow. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished, leaving David alone in the darkness. Terrified and confused, David decided to learn more about the house's history. He visited the local library and searched through old newspapers and records. He discovered that the house had been built in the late 1800s by a man named Harold Thompson. Harold had lived there with his wife and son, but tragedy struck when the boy died in a terrible accident. Harold had been devastated by the loss and had become reclusive, spending most of his time in the attic, where he reportedly communicated with his son's spirit. After Harold's death, the house had changed hands many times, with each owner experiencing strange occurrences. The old man's ghost had been seen by several previous occupants, always in the attic, always mumbling to himself. David knew he couldn't handle this alone. He reached out to a local paranormal investigator named Sarah, who agreed to help. Sarah had years of experience dealing with hauntings and was intrigued by David's story. She brought her equipment and spent several nights in the house, documenting the activity. Sarah confirmed David's suspicions. The house was indeed haunted by Harold's spirit. She explained that Harold was likely trapped, unable to move on because of his unresolved grief. The mumbling David had heard was Harold speaking to his son's spirit, reliving the past over and over. Sarah suggested performing a cleansing ritual to help Harold find peace. David agreed, hoping it would finally bring an end to the haunting. Sarah prepared for the ritual, gathering sage, candles, and other items needed to cleanse the house. She and David began in the attic, where the activity was strongest. They lit the sage and candles, and Sarah started to recite an incantation, asking Harold to find peace and move on. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the attic dropped sharply, and a room filled with an oppressive, heavy feeling. The rocking chair began to sway again, and the faint mumbling returned, growing louder and more desperate. Sarah continued the ritual, urging Harold to let go of his grief and find peace. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, and the candles flickered wildly. The figure of Harold appeared once more, looking more solid and real than before. He stared at David and Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. David stepped forward, speaking to Harold's spirit. He told him that his son was at peace and that it was time for Harold to move on. He assured Harold that he was not forgotten and that his love for his son was still felt. As David spoke, the room seemed to lighten. Harold's figure began to fade, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The rocking chair stopped moving, and the mumbling ceased. Finally, Harold's spirit disappeared, leaving behind a sense of calm and tranquility. Sarah completed the ritual, sealing the house from further disturbances. She told David that the haunting was over and that Harold had finally found peace. In the days that followed, the house felt different. The strange noises stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere was gone. David felt a renewed sense of peace and comfort in his home. He continued to research the history of the house, wanting to honor the memory of Harold and his family. He found a photograph of Harold and his son and placed it in a frame on the mantel, a tribute to the spirits who had once inhabited the house. David knew that the house's history was a part of its charm, and he felt a deeper connection to his home because of it. David often thought about Harold and his tragic story. He felt grateful to have helped the old man find peace and to have been a part of his journey. The experience had changed David, deepening his appreciation for life and the connections we share with those who came before us. David found peace, and Harold's spirit finally rested, but not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 3. Our next story is about a woman tormented by mysterious phone calls. This is the phone calls. Jessica had always loved the sound of rain. On stormy nights, she would curl up with a good book and a cup of tea, enjoying the soothing rhythm of raindrops against her window. But one stormy night, her peaceful evening was shattered by an unexpected phone call. The phone rang loudly, startling her. She picked it up, expecting to hear a friend's voice or a wrong number. Instead, she heard a whisper. "Jessica," the voice said, soft and eerie. Her heart raced. She asked who it was, but the line went dead. Shaking off the unease, she told herself it was just a prank call. She returned to her book, but the sense of dread lingered. Over the next few days, the calls continued. Each time, the voice would whisper her name, growing more frantic and desperate with each call. Jessica contacted the phone company, hoping to trace the calls or block the number, but they found no record of any incoming calls during those times. Frustrated and scared, Jessica started to document each call, noting the time and any details she could remember. The calls always came at night, always during a storm. She began to dread the sound of her phone ringing, knowing it would bring another terrifying whisper. Jessica decided to take matters into her own hands. She borrowed a friend's old tape recorder and began recording the calls, hoping to find some clue about the caller. One night, as the storm raged outside, the phone rang again. She answered, and the voice whispered her name. This time, she kept the caller on the line, asking questions and trying to provoke response. The voice became more agitated, repeating her name over and over. Then, for the first time, it said something different. "Help me." Jessica's blood ran cold. The call ended abruptly, leaving her with more questions than answers. She played back the recording, listening carefully. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it sounded familiar. She couldn't place it, but she felt a deep sense of recognition. Determined to find the source of the calls, Jessica began to dig into her past. She went through old photographs, letters, and diaries, searching for anything that might explain the mysterious voice. As she combed through her memories, She stumbled upon a photograph of her childhood home. The sight of the old house brought back a flood of memories. She remembered the creaky floors, the smell of her mother's cooking, and the attic where she and her siblings used to play. She also remembered the night her younger brother, Tommy, had gone missing. Tommy had been just 6 years old, and his disappearance had devastated the family. Despite extensive searches and investigations, he was never found. The family had eventually moved away, hoping to leave the painful memories behind. Jessica began to wonder if the voice on the phone could be connected to Tommy. The thought seemed absurd, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the calls were somehow linked to her past. She decided to visit her old hometown and see if she could uncover any new information. She drove to the town where she had grown up, feeling a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The old house was still standing, now occupied by a new family. She knocked on the door and introduced herself, explaining her connection to the house. The family was kind and allowed her to look around. As she walked through the familiar rooms, memories came flooding back. She climbed the stairs to the attic, where she and Tommy had spent so much time playing. The attic was now used for storage, but it still had the same musty smell and dim lighting. Jessica noticed a small, old-fashioned phone in the corner of the attic. It looked out of place among the boxes and furniture. Curious, she picked up the receiver and listened. To her surprise, she heard a faint dial tone. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that the phone looked exactly like the one she had used as a child. She wondered if it was possible that the phone was somehow connected to the mysterious calls she had been receiving. Determined to find answers, Jessica took the phone with her and returned home. She set it up in her living room and waited for the next storm. That night, as the rain poured down and thunder rumbled in the distance, the phone rang. Jessica picked up the receiver, her heart pounding. The same eerie voice whispered her name, but this time it sounded different, clearer, more urgent. "Jessica, help me," the voice pleaded. She recognized it now. It was Tommy. Tears filled her eyes as she listened to her brother's voice, frozen in time. She begged him to tell her where he was, how she could help. The voice faded in and out, as if struggling to be heard. Attic ... Under the floor, it said before the line went dead. Jessica knew what she had to do. She returned to her old hometown, determined to find her brother. With the new family's permission, she went back to the attic and began searching for any hidden compartments or clues. After hours of searching, Jessica found a loose floorboard in the attic. She pried it open and discovered a small, hidden space. Inside, she found a bundle of old clothes, a toy truck, and a piece of paper with childish handwriting. The paper was a note from Tommy. It was simple but heartbreaking. "I'm scared. Please find me." Jessica realized that Tommy had hidden in the attic, scared and alone, on the night he disappeared. He had left the note, hoping someone would find him. Jessica's heart ached as she held the note. She knew that Tommy's spirit had been reaching out to her, trying to find closure. She decided to give him the peace he deserved. Jessica and her family held a memorial for Tommy, honoring his memory and acknowledging the tragedy that had torn their family apart. They placed the note, the toy truck, and a photograph of Tommy in a small box and buried it in a peaceful spot in the garden. As they said their goodbyes, Jessica felt a sense of relief and closure. She knew that Tommy's spirit was finally at rest. The mysterious phone calls stopped, and the house felt warm and welcoming once more. Jessica returned home, feeling a profound sense of peace. She kept the old phone as a reminder of the journey she had taken and the connection she had rediscovered with her brother. Jessica found peace, and Tommy's spirit finally rested, but not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 4. Next story is about a woman who sees a mysterious figure in her window. This is the figure in the window. Emily had always dreamed of living in the countryside. When she found a charming cottage surrounded by fields and forests, She knew it was the perfect place to start her new life. The cottage was small but cozy, with a beautiful garden and a view of the rolling hills. She moved in with excitement, ready to embrace the peace and tranquility of her new home. The first few days were idyllic, filled with gardening, exploring the nearby woods, and enjoying the fresh air. Emily felt more relaxed and happy than she had in years. One evening, as the sun was setting, Emily was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She glanced out the window and saw a figure standing at the edge of the garden. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes. His face was obscured by shadows. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She walked to the window and peered outside, but the figure was gone. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the fading light, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Over the next few days, Emily saw the figure several more times. Always at dusk, always at the edge of the garden. Each time, he would disappear as soon as she tried to get a closer look. She began to feel a growing sense of dread, as if the figure was watching her, waiting for something. She confided in her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had lived in the area for decades. Mrs. Thompson listened carefully and then told Emily a chilling story. Many years ago, a man named John had lived in the cottage. He was a reclusive artist, known for his dark and haunting paintings. John had mysteriously disappeared one night, leaving behind a series of disturbing paintings that seemed to depict scenes from a nightmare. Some believed that John had gone mad and wandered into the woods, never to be seen again. Others whispered that his spirit still lingered, haunting the cottage. Intrigued and frightened, Emily decided to search the cottage for any of John's paintings. She explored the attic and found a dusty old trunk. Inside were several canvases, each one more disturbing than the last. The paintings depicted dark, twisted landscapes and shadowy figures with hollow eyes. One painting, in particular, caught her attention. It showed a man standing at the edge of a garden, his face obscured by shadows. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The figure in the painting looked exactly like the one she had seen outside her window. She hung the paintings in the attic, hoping that they would provide some clues about John's fate. She also decided to keep a journal, documenting her sightings of the figure and any other strange occurrences. One stormy night, Emily was awakened by a loud crash. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening intently. Another crash followed, this time from downstairs. She grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made her way to the kitchen. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. As Emily entered the kitchen, she saw the figure standing at the window, staring inside with empty eyes. She gasped and froze, unsure of what to do. The figure seemed solid and real, yet somehow ethereal, like a shadow come to life. "Who are you?" Emily finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The figure turned slowly, its gaze fixed on her. It raised a hand, beckoning her closer. Emily's instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. Suddenly, the figure vanished, leaving Emily alone in the darkness. She stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Had she imagined it? Or had she truly seen a ghostly apparition? Shaken but determined, Emily began to research the history of the cottage and its previous occupants. She discovered that John had indeed been an artist known for his unsettling paintings. His disappearance had been a mystery that had never been solved. As Emily delved deeper into John's story, she began to feel a connection to him. She empathized with his reclusive nature and his obsession with his art. She wondered if his spirit was trapped, unable to find peace until his disappearance was resolved. Determined to help John find peace, Emily decided to hold a séance in the cottage. She invited Mrs. Thompson and a few close friends who were experienced in spiritual matters. Together, they gathered in the living room, forming a circle around a table covered in candles and old photographs. They held hands and closed their eyes, focusing their thoughts on John and his spirit. Emily spoke softly, inviting John to join them and share his story. The room grew still, the only sound the flickering of candle flames and the distant rumble of thunder. Suddenly, a chill filled the air, and Emily felt a presence in the room. She opened her eyes and saw a faint, misty figure standing at the edge of the circle. It was John, his face obscured by shadows, but his presence unmistakable. "John, we want to help you," Emily said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Tell us what happened. Why are you still here?" The figure hesitated, as if unsure how to respond. Then, slowly, it began to speak, a soft, whispering voice filled with sorrow and regret. John's voice was faint, but clear as he recounted the events leading up to his disappearance. He had become consumed by his art, creating increasingly dark and disturbing paintings that seemed to reflect his inner turmoil. One stormy night, overcome by despair, he had wandered into the woods, hoping to find inspiration for his next masterpiece. But instead of inspiration, he had found tragedy. Lost and disoriented, he had stumbled into a ravine and fallen, injuring himself badly, unable to move. As John finished his story, Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She understood now why he had lingered, unable to find peace. She and her friends reached out to John, offering him forgiveness and compassion. "We release you, John," Emily said softly. "You don't have to stay here anymore. Find your way to the light and rest." With those words, John's figure began to fade, becoming more insubstantial until it disappeared completely. The room felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Emily and her friends sat in silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. They knew that John's spirit had finally found peace, able to move on from the darkness that had held him captive for so long. Emily continued to live in the cottage, grateful for the experience that had brought her closer to John and to herself. She knew that the line between the living and the dead was thinner than most people realized, and that sometimes the past could reach out and touch us in unexpected ways. Emily found peace, and John's spirit finally rested, but not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 6. Next story is about a man who encounters a mysterious shadow at his window. This is the shadow at the window. Mark had recently moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. He had always been drawn to its historic charm and had spent months restoring it to its former glory. The house was spacious, with high ceilings and ornate woodwork, but there was something about it that made Mark uneasy. From the first night, Mark began to notice strange occurrences. Shadows would move in the corners of his vision, and he often felt a cold breeze even on warm days. He dismissed it as his imagination, attributing it to the old house settling. One night, as Mark was getting ready for bed, he saw a shadow move across the window in his bedroom. He froze, heart pounding, and turned to look outside. There was nothing there, just the empty street illuminated by a solitary street lamp. He shook his head, trying to reassure himself that it was just a trick of the light. But over the following nights, he continued to see the shadow at the window. It would appear suddenly, hovering just outside the glass, and then vanish without a trace. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark began researching the history of the house. He learned that it had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy businessman named Jonathan Fairweather. Fairweather had been rumored to be involved in shady dealings and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Mark visited the local library and pored over old newspapers and records, searching for any mention of Fairweather or the house. He found a faded photograph of the house from the early 1900s, but there was no sign of the shadowy figure he had seen. One stormy night, as Mark sat in his study reading by lamplight, he heard a soft tapping at the window. He looked up and saw the shadowy figure standing outside, its form indistinct against the rain-streaked glass. Heart pounding, Mark approached the window and pressed his hand against the cold pane. The figure mirrored his movements, as if trying to reach through the barrier between them. It seemed to waver, as if struggling to maintain its form. "Who are you?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. The figure remained silent, its presence unsettling yet strangely familiar. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the figure was not a random apparition, it was connected to the house itself. Through his research and conversations with neighbors, Mark pieced together the story of Jonathan Fairweather. Fairweather had indeed been involved in illicit activities, using his wealth and influence to manipulate others. He had disappeared one stormy night, leaving behind rumors of foul play and unfinished business. Mark began to suspect that Fairweather's restless spirit was trapped in the house, unable to move on until his secrets were revealed. He decided to confront the shadowy figure and offer it a chance for closure. Armed with knowledge and determination, Mark waited for the next stormy night. When it came, he stood by the window and spoke aloud, addressing Jonathan Fairweather's spirit directly. "Jonathan," he said firmly, "I know you're here. You're trapped, aren't you? What do you want?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, the shadowy figure appeared at the window once more. It seemed to shimmer, as if struggling to communicate. Mark held his ground, waiting for an answer. Finally, a faint whisper filled the room, barely audible over the wind. "Help me," the voice said, filled with desperation and longing. Moved by Fairweather's plea, Mark continued to speak gently, urging him to let go of the past and find peace. He recounted the history of the house and Fairweather's legacy, offering forgiveness and understanding. As Mark spoke, he felt a shift in the air, soft breeze that seemed to carry away the shadows. The figure at the window grew fainter, its presence fading until it was gone completely. Mark sensed a profound stillness settle over the house, as if a burden had been lifted. In the days that followed, Mark felt a sense of peace and closure. The strange occurrences ceased, and the house felt lighter and more welcoming. He continued to live there, grateful for the experience that had brought him closer to understanding the mysteries of the past. Mark kept a photograph of Jonathan Fairweather in his study, a reminder of the man who had once inhabited the house. He knew that Fairweather's spirit had finally found peace, able to move on from the darkness that had held him captive for so long. Mark found peace, and Jonathan Fairweather's spirit finally rested. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 7. Our next story is about a young woman who discovers a chilling secret hidden within an antique mirror. This is the mirror's reflection. Amelia loved exploring antique shops, searching for hidden treasures with stories to tell. One rainy afternoon, she stumbled upon a small shop tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The shop was filled with dusty shelves lined with mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Amelia's gaze was drawn to a tall, ornate mirror standing in the corner. Its wooden frame was intricately carved, and its surface was slightly tarnished with age. She felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if it held a secret waiting to be discovered. Unable to resist, Amelia approached the shopkeeper and inquired about the mirror. The old man smiled knowingly and told her that it was a rare find, rumored to have belonged to a wealthy family with a tragic history. Intrigued, Amelia purchased the mirror and arranged for it to be delivered to her apartment. That night, as she admired her new acquisition, Amelia noticed something unsettling in the mirror's reflection. For a brief moment, she saw a shadowy figure standing behind her, its eyes filled with sadness. She turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Over the following days, Amelia began to notice strange occurrences in her apartment. Objects would move on their own, and she heard whispers echoing through the rooms when she was alone. Each time, she caught fleeting glimpses of the shadowy figure in the mirror's reflection, watching her silently. Amelia became increasingly unsettled, feeling as though she was being watched at all times. She started to research the mirror's history, hoping to uncover the truth behind its mysterious influence. Through her research, Amelia discovered that the mirror had indeed belonged to the Thompson family, who had lived in a grand mansion decades ago. The family had been plagued by tragedy, with several members meeting untimely deaths under mysterious circumstances. Legend had it that the mirror had captured the souls of those who had died tragically in the mansion, trapping them within its glass. The shadowy figures Amelia had seen were said to be the restless spirits of the Thompson family, seeking release from their eternal prison. Determined to free the trapped souls and rid herself of the mirror's haunting presence, Amelia sought out a paranormal investigator named Dr. Michaels. Dr. Michaels had experience dealing with supernatural phenomena and agreed to help Amelia uncover the mirror's secrets. Together, they conducted a seance in Amelia's apartment, surrounding the mirror with candles and ancient symbols of protection. As they called out to the spirits trapped within the mirror, a cold wind filled the room, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. "Thompson family, if you can hear us, show us a sign," Dr. Michaels intoned solemnly. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, Amelia felt a presence behind her, a soft whisper brushing against her ear. The spirits of the Thompson family appeared before them, their forms translucent and shimmering. They looked at Amelia with pleading eyes, as if begging for forgiveness and understanding. Dr. Michaels spoke gently to them, offering words of compassion and reassurance. "You are not forgotten," Amelia said softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You can find peace now. Let go of your pain and find your way to the light." Slowly, the spirits began to fade, their presence growing fainter until they were gone completely. The room felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from Amelia's shoulders. In the days that followed, Amelia felt a sense of relief and closure. The strange occurrences ceased, and the mirror no longer held any malevolent presence. She donated the mirror to a museum, where it would be displayed with a plaque detailing its haunted history. Amelia continued to visit Dr. Michaels, seeking guidance as she processed her experience. Amelia found peace, and the spirits of the Thompson family finally rested. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 8. Our next story is about a group of friends who venture into a haunted forest, only to encounter something far more sinister than they ever imagined. This is the Whispering Woods. 5 friends Sarah, Jack, Emily, Alex, and Rachel were avid hikers and nature enthusiasts. They often explored the nearby forests and mountains, seeking adventure and solitude. One summer, they heard rumors of a secluded forest known as the Whispering Woods, said to be haunted by the spirits of those lost within its depths. Intrigued and undeterred by the warnings, the friends decided to embark on an expedition to find the Whispering Woods. Armed with camping gear and a sense of excitement, they set off early one morning, eager to uncover the forest. After hours of hiking through dense undergrowth and towering trees, the friends finally reached the edge of the Whispering Woods. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped them as they entered the shadowy depths of the forest. The trees seemed to whisper secrets as the wind rustled through their leaves, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Sarah shivered, feeling as though unseen eyes were watching their every move. Jack reassured her, but even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over them like a heavy blanket. As night fell, the friends set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. They built a fire and exchanged nervous laughs, trying to lighten the mood, but their unease only grew as strange noises echoed through the woods. Soft footsteps, distant whispers, and eerie laughter that sent chills down their spines. Emily, the group's skeptic, scoffed at their fears and suggested they explore the forest further. Alex and Rachel hesitated, but Jack agreed, eager to prove there was nothing to fear. Sarah remained by the fire, her senses on high alert as the others ventured deeper into the Whispering Woods. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the friends stumbled upon an abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. Its windows were broken, and the wood was weathered and warped with age. Inside, they found remnants of a life long forgotten: a rusted kettle, torn curtains fluttering in the wind, and faded photographs scattered across the floor. But it was the journal they discovered that sent shivers down their spines. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles and desperate pleas for help, written by a lost soul trapped within the whispering woods. The last entry spoke of a malevolent presence that stalked the forest, feeding on fear and despair. As they read the journal, a cold wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing their lantern and plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through the group as they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching from outside. They huddled together, hearts racing, as the cabin filled with an oppressive darkness. Suddenly, a figure materialized before them, a shadowy entity with glowing eyes and an aura of malevolence. It emitted a guttural growl, sending terror coursing through their veins. They tried to flee, but the entity moved with unnatural speed, blocking their escape with its presence. Desperate and filled with adrenaline, the friends fought back against the entity, using whatever makeshift weapons they could find in the cabin. Jack managed to grab a broken chair leg and swung it at the entity, causing it to recoil momentarily. Sarah found a dusty old mirror and held it up, reflecting the entity's own dark energy back at it. With a primal scream, the entity vanished into the shadows, leaving the friends shaken but alive. They stumbled out of the cabin and ran through the whispering woods, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the dense canopy above. Exhausted and traumatized, the friends eventually found their way back to the edge of the whispering woods. They collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath and trying to process the harrowing ordeal they had just survived. The forest around them fell silent once more, as if the entity had never existed. They vowed never to speak of what they had encountered in the whispering woods, knowing that some horrors were better left forgotten. But deep down, they knew that the malevolent presence still lingered within the depths of the forest, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. Friends escaped the whispering woods, but the malevolent entity still lurks in its shadows, hungry for fear and despair. Remember, brave souls, when you venture into the unknown, tread carefully. Not all mysteries are meant to be unraveled. Story 9. Next story is about a young couple who moves into a historic mansion, only to discover a forgotten room with a terrifying secret. This is the Forgotten Room. Emily and Daniel had always dreamed of owning a historic home, with its grandeur and old-world charm. When they stumbled upon a beautiful mansion nestled in the countryside, they knew it was the perfect place to start their new life together. The mansion had been vacant for years, its previous owners gone without a trace. Excited and eager, Emily and Daniel moved in, marveling at the ornate architecture and sprawling gardens. But as they settled into their new home, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One day, while exploring the mansion's labyrinth in corridors, Emily stumbled upon a hidden door tucked away in a forgotten corner of the basement. The door was covered in cobwebs and dust, its wooden frame worn with age. Intrigued, Emily called Daniel over, and together they managed to pry it open. Behind the door lay a small, dimly lit room that seemed frozen in time. The air was musty and stale, filled with the scent of decay. Dust-covered furniture lined the walls, and old portraits hung crookedly on the peeling wallpaper. But it was the mirror in the center of the room that caught Emily's attention. Its surface was cracked and tarnished, reflecting distorted images of the room around them. Daniel approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As they explored further, Emily and Daniel began to experience strange occurrences in the mansion. Objects would move on their own, and they heard faint whispers echoing through the halls at night. Emily saw fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures in the mirrors, watching them with cold, distant eyes. Daniel tried to dismiss their fears, attributing the phenomena to the mansion's age and history. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked within the forgotten room, hidden from sight but never truly gone. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily delved into the mansion's history, piecing together fragments of the past from old records and newspaper clippings. She learned that the mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family with a dark secret, a secret that had been buried for generations. The more Emily uncovered, the more she realized that the forgotten room held the key to unlocking the mansion's haunted past. She sought out local historians and paranormal experts, hoping to unravel the mystery before it consumed them both. Through their investigations, Emily and Daniel discovered that the Forgotten Room had once been used for occult rituals and dark ceremonies. The mirror in the room was believed to be a portal to the spirit world, used by the mansion's previous owners to communicate with malevolent entities beyond the veil. The mirror had become a vessel for trapped souls seeking revenge and release. Emily and Daniel realized that the shadowy figures they had seen were the restless spirits of those who had suffered at the hands of the mansion's former residents. Armed with knowledge and determination, Emily and Daniel decided to confront the malevolent presence within the Forgotten Room. They gathered in the basement, surrounded by candles and symbols of protection, and called out to the trapped spirits with solemn reverence. "Show yourselves," Emily whispered, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "We know you're here. We want to help you find peace." Suddenly, the air grew thick with a cold wind, and the mirror began to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The room filled with a cacophony of voices, pleading and anguished, as the spirits manifested before them. Emily and Daniel spoke gently to the spirits, offering words of forgiveness and compassion. They recounted the mansion's dark history and the pain that had been inflicted upon the innocent. Slowly, the spirits began to fade, their forms becoming translucent and ethereal. "I release you," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with empathy. "Find your way to the light and leave this place forever." With a final whisper, the spirits vanished, leaving Emily and Daniel standing alone in the basement. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They knew that the mansion would never be the same, but they had brought closure to those who had suffered within its walls. In the days that followed, Emily and Daniel restored the Forgotten Room, transforming it into a peaceful sanctuary filled with light and warmth. They dedicated it to the memory of those who had been lost, ensuring that their stories would never be forgotten. As they settled back into their lives in the mansion, Emily and Daniel felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. They knew that the past would always linger in the shadows, but they had faced its darkness and emerged stronger together. Emily and Daniel found peace, and the spirits of the Forgotten Room finally rested. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 10. Next story, about a family who inherits a mysterious dollhouse with a terrifying secret. This is the haunted dollhouse. The Johnson family had recently inherited a sprawling Victorian mansion from a distant relative they had never met. Excited and curious, they explored every corner of their new home, marveling at its grandeur and hidden treasures. In the attic, tucked away in a forgotten corner, they discovered a dusty old trunk containing an intricately crafted dollhouse. Its miniature rooms were furnished with tiny chairs, tables, and delicate porcelain dolls with blank, staring eyes. But as soon as they brought the dollhouse into their home, strange things began to happen. At first, the odd happenings were subtle doors creaking open on their own, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, and soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The Johnsons dismissed these occurrences as quirks of an old house settling, but as days turned into weeks, the incidents escalated. The dolls in the dollhouse seemed to move on their own, changing positions overnight. The Johnsons woke up to find tiny footprints in the dust around the dollhouse, leading to nowhere. Unease settled over the family as they realized that the dollhouse was more than just a toy. It held a sinister presence that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Determined to uncover the truth, Mr. Johnson delved into the mansion's history, searching for any clues about the origins of the haunted dollhouse. He discovered that it had been crafted by a reclusive toy maker named Samuel Blackwood, known for his intricate and lifelike creations. Rumors circulated that Blackwood had imbued his creations with dark magic, using them as vessels for trapped souls seeking revenge. Many believed that the dollhouse was cursed, its miniature inhabitants harboring malevolent intentions. Mr. Johnson contacted paranormal experts and historians, hoping to find a way to rid their home of the dollhouse's haunting presence before it was too late. One stormy night, as the Johnsons gathered in the living room, they witnessed a chilling sight. The dolls in the dollhouse began to move with purpose, their tiny hands reaching out as if trying to escape their miniature prison. The air grew cold, and a shadowy figure materialized beside the dollhouse, its eyes glowing with malice. The family watched in horror as the malevolent spirit spoke through the dolls, its voice echoing in the room. It demanded to be set free, promising torment and suffering if its wishes were not fulfilled. Terrified but determined, Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her gaze locked on the shadowy figure. The malevolent spirit revealed its tragic story, a tale of betrayal and injustice that had led to its untimely death. It sought revenge on those who had wronged it, using the dollhouse as a conduit for its vengeful spirit. Feeling a pang of empathy, Mr. Johnson offered to help the spirit find closure and peace. He promised to uncover the truth behind its death and seek justice on its behalf, hoping to appease the restless soul and free his family from its haunting presence. The spirit hesitated, its form wavering as if considering Mr. Johnson's offer. Finally, it nodded in acceptance, its voice filled with bitter resignation. With the help of the paranormal experts and historians, the Johnsons unraveled the mystery of Samuel Blackwood and the malevolent spirit trapped within the dollhouse. They discovered that Blackwood had used dark rituals to bind the spirit to the dollhouse, hoping to harness its power for his own gain. Armed with this knowledge, Mr. Johnson performed a ritual of purification and release, using ancient incantations and symbols to sever the spirit's ties to the dollhouse. The air crackled with energy as the spirit slowly faded from view, its malevolent presence dissipating like mist in the morning sun. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion grew lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from its halls. The dollhouse remained in the attic, but its haunting presence was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. The Johnsons decided to keep the dollhouse a reminder of their ordeal, a testament to the power of empathy and courage in the face of darkness. They vowed never to forget the spirit that had been trapped within its walls, hoping that it had found peace in the afterlife. The Johnson family found peace, and the malevolent spirit trapped within the haunted dollhouse finally rested. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 11. 5 friends Mark, Sarah, Tom, Jessica, and Chris decided to escape the hustle and bustle of city life by renting a secluded lake house deep in the woods. The house, nestled on the shores of a tranquil lake, seemed like the perfect retreat for a weekend of relaxation and bonding. Excited and eager, they arrived at the lake house on a sunny Friday afternoon, ready to unwind and enjoy the beauty of nature surrounding them. Little did they know, something sinister awaited them beneath the calm waters of the lake. As night fell, the friends gathered around a crackling fire pit, sharing stories and laughter under a starlit sky. But as the hours passed, a sense of unease settled over them like a dark cloud. Strange noises echoed through the woods, and a chill wind swept across the lake, sending ripples across its surface. Sarah, always attuned to the supernatural, felt a presence watching them from the depths of the lake. She glanced nervously at the water, her senses on high alert. Tom tried to reassure her, attributing the eerie atmosphere to their secluded surroundings. But as they retired to their rooms for the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone at the lake house. That night, as they slept, the friends were awakened by the sound of splashing water and distant whispers echoing through the house. Mark and Jessica reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the hallways, their forms flickering in and out of view. Chris woke up to find wet footprints leading from the lake to the front door, disappearing mysteriously before his eyes. The air grew heavy with a sense of dread as they realized that the lake house was haunted by a malevolent force that seemed intent on terrorizing them. Desperate for answers, Sarah delved into the history of the lake house, uncovering disturbing tales of tragedy and loss. She learned that the lake had once been a sacred site for a Native American tribe, who believed it was inhabited by vengeful spirits seeking retribution. Legend had it that a powerful shaman had cursed the lake centuries ago, condemning anyone who disturbed its peace to suffer at the hands of the spirits trapped within its depths. Many had perished in mysterious accidents on the lake, their bodies never recovered. As Sarah shared her findings with the group, a sense of dread settled over them. They realized they were facing a force beyond their understanding, one that hungered for vengeance and would stop at nothing to claim their souls. Determined to confront the malevolent force haunting the lake house, the friends gathered by the shore of the lake, armed with sage, protective talismans, and ancient incantations borrowed from Sarah's research. The air crackled with tension as they called out to the spirits, their voices echoing across the water. "Show yourselves," Sarah demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. "We mean you no harm. Release your grip on this place and find peace." Suddenly, the surface of the lake churned violently, and a dark figure emerged from the water, a spectral entity with glowing eyes and an aura of malevolence. It let out a chilling cry, its voice echoing with centuries of anger and sorrow. The friends stood their ground, holding their protective charms aloft as the entity lunged at them with supernatural strength. They fought back with courage and determination, invoking ancient rituals and prayers to weaken the spirit's hold on the lake house. Tom managed to splash holy water onto the entity, causing it to recoil with a blood-curdling scream. Jessica held up a sacred symbol, channeling positive energy to counteract the spirit's malevolent presence. Chris recited protective mantras, his voice steady despite his fear. Together, they formed a barrier of light and love around themselves, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. As the battle raged on, Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She confronted the spirit directly, offering words of empathy and understanding. She spoke of the pain and suffering that had bound the spirit to the lake, urging it to let go of its anger and find peace in the afterlife. Slowly, the entity's form began to fade, its glowing eyes softening with resignation. It whispered a final plea for forgiveness before vanishing beneath the surface of the lake, leaving behind a ripple of calm water and a sense of peace. The friends watched in awe and relief as the malevolent force that had haunted the lake house for centuries finally found release. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the lake house changed for the better. The air felt lighter, and the whispers and shadows that had plagued them disappeared completely. Mark, Sarah, Tom, Jessica, and Chris bonded over their shared ordeal. Grateful to have survived the supernatural encounter, they returned to their lives with a newfound respect for the spiritual world and a deeper understanding of the power of unity and courage in the face of darkness. The lake house remained a place of tranquility and beauty, its haunted past now a distant memory. The friends confronted the malevolent force at the lake house, and peace was restored to the haunted waters. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Story 12. Amelia had always been fascinated by antiques and curiosities from the past. When her grandmother passed away, leaving her an old Victorian mansion filled with relics of a bygone era, she was both excited and apprehensive. Among the heirlooms was a large, ornate mirror rumored to be cursed, a mirror that had been passed down through generations of her family. Intrigued by its mysterious allure, Amelia decided to take the mirror home with her. Despite the warnings of her grandmother's cryptic diary entries about its malevolent power. As soon as Amelia hung the mirror in her bedroom, strange things began to happen. She would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror's reflection, shadowy figures standing just out of sight, watching her with cold, distant eyes. At night, she heard soft whispers echoing through the room, their words unintelligible yet filled with urgency. Amelia's sleep became restless, plagued by vivid dreams of faces pressed against the mirror's surface, pleading for release. She tried to rationalize the occurrences, attributing them to stress or an overactive imagination, but deep down, she knew that something unnatural lurked within the mirror. As soon as Amelia hung the mirror in her bedroom, strange things began to happen. She would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror's reflection, shadowy figures standing just out of sight, watching her with cold, distant eyes. At night, she heard soft whispers echoing through the room, their words unintelligible yet filled with urgency. Amelia's sleep became restless, plagued by vivid dreams of faces pressed against the mirror's surface, pleading for release. She tried to rationalize the occurrences, attributing them to stress or an overactive imagination, but deep down, she knew that something unnatural lurked within the mirror. Determined to uncover the truth about the mirror, Amelia delved into her family's history, poring over old journals and letters left behind by her ancestors. She learned that the mirror had once belonged to a powerful sorceress who used it to trap souls seeking vengeance and redemption. Legend had it that the mirror held the spirits of those who had suffered unjustly, their reflections eternally trapped within its glass. Amelia's grandmother had warned of its dark influence, urging her descendants to break the curse before it claimed more lives. Fueled by a mixture of curiosity and fear, Amelia sought out experts in the occult and paranormal, hoping to find a way to free the trapped souls and cleanse the mirror of its malevolent presence. As Amelia conducted her research, the mirror's haunting presence intensified. She began to see the spirits of the trapped souls more clearly, faces twisted in anguish, hands pressed against the glass as if pleading for salvation. Their whispers grew louder, filling her thoughts with their sorrow and desperation. One evening, as Amelia stared into the mirror, she felt a cold hand brush against her own reflection. Startled, she stumbled back, her heart racing with fear. The mirror seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light, its surface rippling like water, as if trying to break free from its confines. Terrified yet determined, Amelia knew that she had to confront the mirror's curse head-on, before it consumed her sanity and claimed her soul. Armed with ancient incantations and protective talismans, Amelia stood before the mirror in her dimly lit bedroom. She lit candles and placed them in a circle around her, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air grew thick with anticipation as she recited the incantations passed down through generations of her family. "Release the souls trapped within this mirror," Amelia commanded, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Let them find peace and move on to the afterlife." The mirror began to glow with a bluish light, its surface pulsating with energy. Amelia felt a surge of power coursing through her, as if the spirits were responding to her call for redemption. Suddenly, the mirror shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards of glass flying through the air. A gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it the whispers of 1,000 voices, cries of relief and gratitude as the trapped souls were finally set free. Amelia shielded her face from the flying debris, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. When she looked up, she saw the room bathed in a warm, ethereal light. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The spirits of the mirror's victims appeared before her, their forms translucent and shimmering with a gentle glow. They nodded in silent gratitude before ascending towards the ceiling, disappearing into the unknown. In the days that followed, Amelia felt a profound sense of peace and closure. The haunting presence that had plagued her for so long was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of serenity. She knew that she had broken the curse of the mirror, freeing the trapped souls and honoring her grandmother's legacy. Amelia decided to donate the remnants of the mirror to a museum specializing in paranormal artifacts, hoping that its dark history would serve as a cautionary tale for others. She moved forward with her life, grateful for the lessons learned and the strength gained from facing the supernatural head-on. Amelia confronted the cursed mirror and freed the souls trapped within its glass. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 13. A group of friends, Alex, Mia, James, and Lily, decided to embark on a hiking adventure through a remote forest known for its untouched wilderness and mysterious legends. As they trekked deeper into the woods, they felt a sense of awe and unease at the ancient trees towering above them, their branches intertwined like gnarled fingers reaching towards the sky. They set up camp near a clearing where the trees seemed to converge, creating a natural amphitheater. As night fell, the air grew still, and the forest was enveloped in an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of the campfire. Little did they know, the Whispering Grove held secrets that would soon unravel their courage and test their bonds of friendship. That night, as they sat around the campfire, exchanging stories and laughter, Alex noticed a faint murmur carried on the wind, a whispering voice that seemed to come from the heart of the grove. At first, the others dismissed it as a trick of the wind or their imagination, but as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder and more distinct, their words haunting and incomprehensible. James swore he heard his name whispered in the breeze, while Mia felt a cold breath against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. Lily, always sensitive to the supernatural, sensed a presence among the trees, a presence that seemed to watch them with curious intent. The next morning, over breakfast, the group shared their unsettling experiences from the previous night. Lily, who had a knack for local folklore, recalled a legend passed down through generations of villagers living near the forest. According to the legend, the Whispering Grove was once a sacred site where ancient rituals were performed to commune with spirits of the forest. The trees were said to be imbued with the memories and voices of those who had lived and died in the forest, their whispers echoing through the ages. But as civilization encroached upon the wilderness, the spirits grew restless, their whispers turning into warnings and cries for help that only the brave or foolish dared to heed. Determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting whispers, the friends ventured deeper into the grove, guided by Lily's intuition and the faint echoes that seemed to draw them towards a hidden glade. The air grew thick with anticipation as they followed a winding path lined with ancient stones and gnarled roots. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a weathered stone altar surrounded by towering trees. Moss-covered statues of forest spirits stood guard, their faces worn with age and weather. The whispers intensified, swirling around them like a gentle breeze that carried echoes of laughter and sorrow. Mia reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cold stone of the altar. In that moment, the whispers coalesced into a chorus of voices, a cacophony of joy, pain, and longing that spoke of lives lived and lost in the embrace of the Whispering Grove. As they listened to the haunting voices, the friends realized that the grove held the spirits of those who had once sought solace and sanctuary within its embrace. The whispers told stories of love and betrayal, of sacrifices made in the name of honor and duty. But amidst the tales of sorrow, there was a sense of peace, a recognition that their presence had been acknowledged and accepted by the spirits of the forest. Alex, moved by the experience, felt a connection to the ancient wisdom that permeated the grove, a bond forged through shared reverence for nature's mysteries. As the sun set over the Whispering Grove, casting long shadows among the ancient trees, the friends prepared to leave. They bid farewell to the spirits that had shared their stories and whispered secrets of a time long past. Lily, with tears in her eyes, whispered a heartfelt thank you to the spirits, promising to cherish the memory of their encounter forever. Mia and James placed offerings of wildflowers and herbs at the base of the stone altar, honoring the spirits that had welcomed them into their sacred sanctuary. With a final glance back at the Whispering Grove, the friends turned and walked away, their hearts heavy yet filled with a profound sense of gratitude and wonder. The friends encountered the haunting whispers of the ancient grove and found solace in its embrace. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 14. Emily, a young photographer with a passion for vintage artifacts, stumbled upon the cursed photograph at an antique shop tucked away in a quiet corner of town. The shop's owner, an elderly man with a weathered face and keen eyes, warned Emily of its dark history shrouded in tragedy and despair. Intrigued by the photograph's enigmatic aura, Emily purchased it despite the shop owner's dire warnings. She hung it in her studio apartment, captivated by the mystery it seemed to exude. Little did Emily know, the photograph held a malevolent presence that would soon unravel her world. That night, as Emily slept, she was awakened by a soft tapping sound coming from the direction of the photograph. She rubbed her eyes grudgingly, wondering if she had dreamed it. But then, she heard it again, a faint tapping that seemed to echo in the stillness of her apartment. Curiosity mingled with unease. Emily approached the photograph. As she gazed at the faces of the family captured in black and white, she felt a chill run down her spine. Their eyes seemed to bore into her soul, their expressions frozen in a haunting mixture of sorrow and longing. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic yet irregular, as if someone or something was trying to communicate from beyond the confines of the photograph. Determined to unravel the mystery of the cursed photograph, Emily delved into its origins. She traced its history back to the early 1900s, discovering that it had been taken at a grand mansion on the outskirts of town, a mansion rumored to be haunted by the spirits of its former inhabitants. Legend had it that a tragedy had befallen the family in the photograph, a tragedy so devastating that it had left a lingering imprint on their souls, forever bound to the image captured on film. Emily sought out local historians and paranormal experts, hoping to find a way to free the trapped spirits and break the curse that held them captive within the photograph. As Emily continued her investigation, the malevolent presence within the photograph grew stronger. She began to experience strange occurrences. Objects moved inexplicably in her apartment, shadows darted across her peripheral vision, and a cold breeze swept through the room whenever she approached the photograph. One evening, Emily woke to find the photograph glowing faintly in the darkness, its edges shimmering with an unnatural light. She heard faint whispers, guttural and sorrowful, emanating from the photograph, filling her with a sense of dread and foreboding. Terrified yet determined, Emily knew that she had to confront the cursed photograph and uncover the truth behind its dark secrets. Armed with sage, protective charms, and ancient incantations borrowed from her research, Emily stood before the photograph in her dimly lit apartment. She lit candles and arranged them in a circle around her, their flames flickering in the still air. Drawing upon her courage, Emily recited the incantations, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her heart. She called upon the spirits trapped within the photograph, urging them to reveal themselves and find peace in the afterlife. The air crackled with energy as Emily felt a presence cold and palpable surrounding her. The photograph trembled on the wall, its surface rippling like water, as if trying to break free from its frame. Suddenly, the photograph exploded with a burst of blinding light, sending shards of glass flying through the air. Emily shielded her face from the debris, her heart racing with adrenaline. When she looked up, she saw the room bathed in a warm, ethereal glow. The spirits of the family in the photograph appeared before her, their forms translucent and shimmering with a gentle radiance. They thanked Emily with silent gratitude, their eyes filled with peace and acceptance. With a final whisper of farewell, the spirits ascended towards the ceiling, disappearing into the unknown, a testament to Emily's bravery and compassion in freeing them from their cursed existence. In the days that followed, Emily felt a profound sense of relief and closure. The haunting presence that had plagued her apartment was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and tranquility. She knew that she had broken the curse of the photograph, releasing the trapped spirits and restoring balance to their restless souls. Emily decided to donate the remnants of the photograph to a museum specializing in paranormal artifacts, hoping that its dark history would serve as a cautionary tale for others. She moved forward with her life, forever changed by her encounter with the supernatural and the power of compassion to transcend even the darkest of curses. Story 15. Sarah had recently moved into a quaint cottage nestled in a picturesque countryside. One stormy evening, as she sat by the fireplace reading, the phone rang, a jarring sound that echoed through the quiet house. Startled, Sarah picked up the receiver, expecting to hear a dial tone or perhaps a wrong number. Instead, she was greeted by a familiar voice, a voice she hadn't heard in years. It was her grandmother's gentle, soothing tone, filled with warmth and love. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she listened, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "Sarah, my dear," the voice said softly, "it's me. I miss you." Confused and shaken, Sarah tried to make sense of the impossible. Her grandmother had passed away several years ago, yet here she was, speaking to Sarah as if she were still alive. The voice on the other end of the line sounded so real, so vivid, that Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The calls became more frequent, always occurring during stormy nights or moments of solitude. Each time, Sarah would hear snippets of conversations they had shared in the past, memories that felt both comforting and unsettling in their intensity. She confided in her closest friends, hoping for reassurance or a logical explanation, but they could offer none. The phantom phone calls continued, each one a haunting reminder of the bond she shared with her grandmother. Desperate for answers, Sarah began to research paranormal phenomena and the possibility of communication from beyond the grave. She consulted psychics and mediums, seeking their guidance in understanding the nature of the phantom phone calls. One psychic, Madame Rose, claimed to have a gift for communicating with spirits. Sarah visited her small shop tucked away in a quiet alley, the scent of incense lingering in the air. Madame Rose studied Sarah with piercing eyes before taking her hand and closing her eyes in concentration. "Your grandmother," Madame Rose murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "She seeks closure," a message left unsaid. Sarah's heart raced with hope and fear. Could it be true? Was her grandmother trying to reach out to her from the other side? Determined to unravel the mystery of the phantom phone calls, Sarah returned to her cottage with renewed purpose. She set up an altar with photographs of her grandmother, lighting candles and burning sage to create a peaceful atmosphere. She closed her eyes and focused on her grandmother's voice, willing herself to listen with an open heart. During the next phantom phone call, Sarah spoke aloud, addressing her grandmother directly. "Grandma," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I miss you too. Is there something you want to tell me?" For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, her grandmother's voice came through, clear and unmistakable. "I love you, Sarah," her grandmother said, her voice filled with tenderness and longing. "I'm at peace now. Please remember me with love, but let me go." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she listened to her grandmother's final message. It was a bittersweet moment of closure and acceptance, a reassurance that love transcends even death. After receiving her grandmother's message, the phantom phone calls gradually ceased. Sarah felt a sense of peace and resolution, knowing that her grandmother had found peace and that their bond would always endure in her heart. She kept a small photo of her grandmother on her bedside table, surrounded by flowers and a candle that she lit every night in remembrance. Sarah cherished the memories they had shared and found solace in the knowledge that love could bridge the gap between the living and the departed. As she moved forward with her life, Sarah carried her grandmother's words with her, a reminder of the power of love and the eternal connection between souls. Sarah received phantom phone calls from her grandmother, a poignant reminder that love transcends even death. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Story 16. Our next story is about a young girl who inherits a beautiful dollhouse that harbors a dark secret within its miniature walls. This is the haunted dollhouse. When Lily's great-aunt passed away, she left behind an exquisite Victorian dollhouse that had been in their family for generations. The dollhouse was a marvel of craftsmanship, with intricately carved furniture, tiny crystal chandeliers, and miniature paintings adorning its walls. Lily, a curious and imaginative girl, was enchanted by the dollhouse from the moment she laid eyes on it. She placed it in her bedroom, marveling at its beauty and imagining the stories that could unfold within its miniature rooms. But soon, Lily would discover that the dollhouse held secrets far more chilling than she could have ever imagined. As Lily played with the dollhouse, arranging the tiny furniture and creating imaginary lives for its inhabitants, strange things began to happen. At night, She would hear soft footsteps echoing from the direction of the dollhouse, as if tiny feet were pacing across its floors. Dolls would move on their own, their positions changing overnight in subtle but noticeable ways. Lily's parents dismissed her concerns as an overactive imagination, attributing the strange occurrences to the quirks of an old house and an even older doll house. But Lily knew deep down that something unnatural was at play within the miniature rooms. One evening, as Lily sat cross-legged in front of the dollhouse, arranging a tea party for the miniature porcelain dolls, she heard faint whispers emanating from within its walls. The voices were hushed and urgent, speaking in a language she couldn't quite understand, but that sent chills down her spine. Curiosity mingled with fear. Lily pressed her ear against the dollhouse's facade, trying to decipher the source of the whispers. She heard snippets of conversations, pleas for help, cries of despair, and fragments of a story that spoke of betrayal and tragedy. The voices seemed to grow louder as Lily listened, their words becoming clearer yet more unsettling with each passing moment. Determined to uncover the truth behind the haunted dollhouse, Lily delved into her family's history, scouring old journals and letters left behind by her ancestors. She learned that the dollhouse had once belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century, a family torn apart by jealousy and greed. Legend had it that the youngest daughter, Charlotte, had been locked away in the attic of the family mansion, her only solace the miniature world she had created within the dollhouse. Charlotte's spirit, trapped within the dollhouse after her tragic death, sought to communicate with the living, longing for justice and redemption. Lily realized that the whispers she had heard were Charlotte's voice, a voice crying out from beyond the grave, yearning to be heard and understood. Armed with newfound knowledge and empathy for Charlotte's plight, Lily approached the dollhouse with a mixture of trepidation and determination. She spoke aloud, addressing Charlotte directly and offering her compassion and understanding. "Charlotte," Lily said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I hear you. I understand your pain. You don't have to be alone anymore." As she spoke, the dollhouse seemed to shimmer with a faint, ethereal light. The voices grew quieter, their tones shifting from anguish to relief. Lily felt a gentle breeze brush against her cheek, carrying with it a sense of peace and closure. In that moment, the haunted dollhouse ceased to be a source of fear and mystery. It became a symbol of resilience and compassion, a testament to the enduring power of empathy to heal even the deepest wounds. As days turned into weeks, Lily continued to care for the dollhouse, treating it with reverence and kindness. She placed fresh flowers by its tiny doorstep and occasionally rearranged the furniture to create new stories for Charlotte and her miniature world. Over time, the strange occurrences ceased entirely. The dollhouse remained silent and still, its rooms bathed in a warm, inviting glow that reflected Lily's compassion and understanding. Lily knew that she had helped Charlotte find peace and closure, allowing her spirit to finally move on from the confines of the haunted dollhouse. She cherished the memories they had shared and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference in Charlotte's afterlife. Lily confronted the haunted dollhouse and helped Charlotte find peace within its miniature walls. But not all stories end so neatly. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. Sometimes, the past lingers, seeking resolution, and sometimes, the haunting continues. Thank you for joining us for this captivating tale. Stay tuned for more disturbing home alone horror stories. And remember, when you're home alone and hear that unexplained sound, it might not be just your imagination. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share your own home alone horror stories in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.